was 19 the first time he said my name like it was poetry. Maggie. Not rushed or careless, but drawn out, like he was tasting every letter. We met at a poetry reading on campus. A dusky little hall tucked behind the library. The room smelled of damp paper and incense, and I was trembling behind the podium, reading a piece I'd written about freedom, about running barefoot in the woods behind my childhood home and feeling, for a moment, like I didn't belong to anyone. When I finished, there was polite applause, and then his, slow, steady, unapologetic. Richard Ellison, sharp-jawed, clean-shaven, dressed in a charcoal sweater, and eyes that held storms. That, he said afterward, holding out a hand, was dangerously honest. I laughed, then blushed. He asked if I wanted to walk. I said yes, not knowing that one word would alter the course of my entire life. That night we walked for hours. He quoted Keats, I quoted Plath. He made fun of her melodrama, and I argued for her brilliance. He listened like every word I said mattered. Not just the poem, but the pauses between thoughts, the places where I hesitated. I told him I wanted to be a writer. He told me I already were one. I'd never met someone like Richard, raised by a single mother, working her fingers raw as a nurse and a waitress just to keep food on their table. He admired ambition like it was sacred, said he had no patience for lazy men, or lazy hearts. And when he looked at me, I felt seen. Not just pretty or polite, but necessary. We fell in love like it was scripted, like a story we both knew the ending to. Within a year, he had a toothbrush in my dorm bathroom, and I had his initials scribbled in the margins of my notebooks. He would sit cross-legged on my dorm bed, while I typed stories on my Smith Corona, reading bits aloud and stopping only to kiss my shoulder or refill my coffee. But even then there were little shifts, harmless at first. "You've been up since 5, darling," he'd say. "Rest. You'll write better after a nap." You don't really want to send that story, do you? It's a little raw. I told myself it was love, care, concern. When I received the letter from the Vermont residency, full tuition, room and board, 6 months of solitude and writing in the woods. I didn't tell anyone for 2 days. I hid the envelope beneath my mattress, rereading it in the quiet of the night. I'd worked for that fellowship. I'd bled for it. Richard proposed the same week. He took me to the botanical gardens, knelt beside a blooming hydrangea, and opened a box with his mother's ring inside, a delicate gold band with a single sapphire. My breath caught. "I need you beside me, Maggie," he said. "We could build something beautiful together." My mother cried when I told her. She said I'd done well, that I'd found someone strong, someone who would provide, that I was lucky, and maybe I was. I tore the fellowship letter in half and threw it away. I chose love. That has to count for something. We married in a small garden ceremony behind my parents' house. I wore my grandmother's lace dress, altered to fit. Richard gave me a vintage copy of Leaves of Grass, inscribed with the words, "To my wild girl, don't ever tame yourself." I remember laughing as I read it. It felt like a promise. Our vows were private. Mine were romantic. Something about growing old in matching rocking chairs. His were tidy, efficient. I vowed to provide, protect, and respect. I didn't realize until years later that he'd left out cherish. We moved to a quiet apartment in Massachusetts, close to the hospital where Richard began his residency. I set up my typewriter in the sunroom, convinced I could still write, still dream. Mornings were for poetry, evenings for cooking. That balance, at first, felt blissful. But my writing slowed. I couldn't finish anything. Ideas slipped through my fingers like water. My thoughts scattered. I was tired. "I'm so tired. Maggie, you're overdoing it," Richard said one morning, watching me rub my temples at the kitchen table. "I'm making you something better than that sludge." He handed me a cup of herbal tea. Warm, golden, vaguely bitter. "Chamomile, lavender, valerian root," he said. "It'll help you rest." My coffee started tasting. strange, metallic, off. But when I mentioned it, he laughed. You've always been sensitive to flavors, remember? I skipped the workshop. Couldn't focus. The tea helps, I think. Richard says I need more rest. Maybe I do. Bea came to visit in the spring. She was the only one who still wrote letters. Long and sarcastic, full of gossip and thinly veiled worry. You're thinner, she said, frowning as we sat in the kitchen. I've just been busy. I lied. She eyed the tea cabinet. Rows of small glass jars, unmarked. What's with the witchy apothecary? Richard's been learning about natural medicine, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Since when is coffee unnatural? Richard came in then, charming as ever. Offered her a cup of his special blend. She declined. Later, when we were alone, she said, You seem not like yourself. I'm happy, I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. I forgot to write today. I forget a lot of things lately. I keep forgetting things these days, but I never forget the ones who stay and subscribe. My typewriter gathered dust in the corner. The keys felt foreign beneath my fingers. My journal entries became shorter. Some were just dates. Some just a single word. Tired. Richard handled the bills, the grocery list, the prescriptions. You've got enough on your plate, he'd say. Let me take care of things. When I cried, he wiped my tears and said, You're too emotional, darling. When I got angry, he smiled. You're just overwhelmed. When I doubted myself, he kissed my forehead and said, That's why I'm here. He never raised his voice. Not once. He didn't have to. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and watch him sleep, his face calm, beautiful in the moonlight. And I'd wonder, not out loud, not even fully in my mind, whether I'd chosen right, whether this was love, or something else dressed to look like it. Bea said something that stuck with me. Don't let yourself disappear for someone else's dream. I told her I haven't disappeared, but sometimes I feel like I'm fading. I kept drinking the tea, the coffee. I kept smiling. I kept sleeping longer than I meant to, skipping writing classes, forgetting things I used to remember. And yet, I loved him. I still do, in some echoing way. Love is a strange thing, especially when it's mixed with sacrifice. You don't always notice what you're giving up until you've already given it. It started with small things. A misplaced shoe, a word I couldn't remember. The name of the neighbor's dog that had once made Rosie giggle every time she said it aloud. Gone. Just like that. It's strange how silence sneaks in, not with a bang, but with a whimper. One day you wake up and realize you've stopped speaking for yourself. Our house, by all appearances, was lovely. Picture perfect, like something out of a New England lifestyle magazine. Brick colonial, ivy on the front, warm yellow light in every window. We had flower beds shaped like commas, always full of color. I remember planting daisies with Rosie one spring, our hands muddy, her braids uneven. She asked me why the flowers always came back even after the snow. I said because they never really leave. I don't know if I believe that anymore. Richard had made it. Private practice. His name is printed on brass outside the clinic door. Dr. Richard Ellison, M.D. The townspeople smiled when they said it. I revered him, admired his grace, his generosity. He still held my hand at parties, brushed crumbs from my cheek, called me darling, in that same careful voice. And everyone thought, what a lucky woman. But inside our home, my world had grown small. A hallway, a chair, a teacup, the fire crackling in winter, and the quiet humming of something I couldn't name. I was tired, always tired. And it wasn't the kind of tired that sleep fixed. It lived inside my bones. There were moments, brief and sharp, when I'd wake up on the staircase, unsure if I'd just come down or was heading up. I'd forget conversations mid-sentence. I'd find things in the fridge that belonged in the pantry, and Richard would appear in the doorway, ever gentle, saying, You need to rest more. You've been pushing yourself. I hadn't written in years. My typewriter sat beneath a dust cover in the attic. I couldn't remember the last poem I read. I couldn't even remember the names of some of the characters I'd once written about. Sometimes I dreamed of them. Flickers of old lines and broken phrases. I'd wake up in a sweat, heart racing, reaching for a pen I no longer kept by the bed. Richard always made my coffee. That never changed. No matter what time I rose, 6 m.m. or nearly noon. The cup was there, warm, filled to the brim, sweetened just how I used to like it. But the taste had changed over the years. It was darker now, sometimes syrupy, sometimes chalky. Once it smelled faintly of mint and something else I couldn't place. He handled everything, appointments, bills, groceries, even my medication. Less stress for you, he'd say, kissing my temple. I once asked about a new pill in the cabinet, a dusky orange tablet I didn't recognize. It's to help regulate your energy, he replied. A new supplement. All natural. I believed him. What else could I do? Bea visited the spring before she died. I knew the moment I opened the door that something had changed between us. She hugged me tight and held on too long. When she pulled away, she stared hard at my face. You look pale, she said. I've just been sleeping poorly. That's not all? We sat in the kitchen. I offered her tea. She declined. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the rows of unmarked glass jars. He's still mixing your blends? I smiled. He knows what I need. No, she said flatly. He knows what he needs you to need. We didn't fight. Not really. But there was tension, old and familiar. She told me to see a doctor. A different one. Told me to come stay with her for a few weeks. I promised I would think about it. 3 days later, she died. Rain slicked the road. They said she lost control coming around the bend near the old bridge. Richard called it a tragedy. Shook his head. Poor thing. Distracted, maybe. She was always a bit reckless. I sobbed into the kitchen counter that night. Not for Bea, not exactly. For the fact that I couldn't remember what we'd said last. For the fact that I'd lied when I said I'd visit. For the fact that I'd never told her about the pills I'd flushed. Or the tea I sometimes poured down the sink. There were letters I never saw. One day, cleaning behind the bookshelf, I found an envelope from Daniel. Torn open, dated 2 years earlier. I stared at the handwriting like it belonged to a stranger. I hadn't heard from my son in months. The letter was short, tender, desperate. Mom, please, just tell me you're okay. I miss you. I don't trust him. I don't know if you remember how to get to my place, but if you do, I'll come pick you up. Just say the word. I never received that letter, or the one after it, or the one after that. Daniel left when he was 17. I remember the last argument, muffled behind the bathroom door. Rosie had her fingers in her ears. I was curled on the couch, unable to stand. You treat her like a patient, Daniel said, not a wife. You have no idea what it's like to love someone who's broken, Richard replied, calm as ever. The next day, Daniel packed a duffel bag and left. He never hugged me goodbye, or if he did, I can't remember it. Rosie never yelled. She never said much at all, but she watched. From doorways, from the stairs. She began drawing constantly, her sketchbooks filled with pictures of teacups, hands with missing rings, crooked clocks. Once I found a drawing of me asleep in my reading chair, my mouth slightly open, a teacup on the table beside me. Why this one? I asked. She looked up and said, You were like that for hours. She found one of my old journals hidden under the bed. Most of the pages were fragmented. Woke up dizzy. Think I missed the mailman. Or was that yesterday? He added something new to the tea. Bitter today. Or maybe I imagined that. Where is Bea? One entry read only, I think I'm disappearing. She never said anything. But I saw her writing things down. Dates, colors of pills, labels. One night around 3 a.m., I woke suddenly. The house was dark. The rain tapped against the windows. I walked barefoot to the kitchen. Richard had left the coffee pot half full. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked it up, poured it slowly down the sink. The next morning, my head felt clearer. My hands shook less. I saw the flowers outside the window and realized I hadn't noticed them blooming. I didn't tell Richard. I didn't tell anyone. But that morning, when I looked in the mirror, truly looked, I saw something small, but still alive, something not yet dead, and I thought, I want to live. I started skipping the coffee quietly. No grand gestures, no dramatic pour into the sink. Just skipped. A morning here, a morning there. Enough to see, enough to feel it. The first day I did it, my hands didn't shake. I brushed my teeth and the toothbrush didn't fall from my grip. I remembered that I'd left the garden hose running the night before and went out and shut it off. That sounds like nothing, doesn't it? A detail, but it felt like lightning. Like my brain had been dipped in cold water. Awake. Present. Mine. Richard noticed, of course. He always noticed everything. "You didn't finish your coffee today," he said. I wasn't in the mood. He smiled. Too quickly, like a man checking a fence for holes. I smiled back smaller. My lips barely moved. I started keeping a new journal. Nothing poetic, not like the old ones. This one was facts, dates, observations, a pattern emerging. Days I drank the coffee. Tremors, confusion, migraines. Days I didn't. I could read again, write, remember, even laugh once. I startled myself. I hid the journal inside an old hollowed-out novel on the shelf. Mrs. Dalloway. Seemed fitting. A woman arranging flowers while quietly losing her grip on the world. Except this time, I wasn't slipping. I was climbing back up. I found his journal by accident. Or maybe not by accident. Maybe I was ready to see. It was tucked between a stack of his old medical files, wrapped in leather, worn at the edges. I thought it might be another one of my own notebooks. The kind he used to say he organized for safekeeping. But it wasn't mine. The handwriting was Richard's. Neat, clinical, detached. Maintain compliance through routine. Adjust herbal ratios if resistance presents. Control is love. There was a date scribbled near the bottom of one page. A week in March. I knew that week. It was the week B died. I stared at the page for a long time, my fingers trembling. Not from weakness, but from rage. Ah, it feels good to talk after so long. If you'd like to hear more from this old heart, subscribe. It means the world to me. Later I met Eleanor in the park. We hadn't seen each other in decades. She looked older, yes, but not unfamiliar. Same sharp eyes, same nervous hands. She recognized me instantly and held my arms like I was something fragile. "I didn't know if you'd actually come," she said. I wasn't sure either. We sat beneath a maple tree. Autumn leaves scattered at our feet. She confessed first that during her rotations at the clinic, she saw Richard use combinations of sedatives that weren't standard. Herbal compounds, experimental blends. "There was a woman," she said, voice cracking. Thin, confused, fragile. "I think it was you." She left the clinic without ever reporting him. She was young, intimidated, unsure. She handed me a folded piece of paper, a list of substances Richard had been working with in those years. Some of them weren't even legal at the time. "You're not crazy, Maggie," she said. "You were never crazy." Vivian visited again not long after. I hadn't expected her. She arrived with a small suitcase, lipstick perfectly drawn, eyes sharper than I remembered. The first morning she sniffed my coffee. "This smells like hell." It always does. She watched Richard make it the next day. She didn't say a word, just stood in the doorway, arms folded. Later she came into my room holding a small metal container. "Found this tucked behind the flower bin," she said. "Smells like valerian root. And something else. Something sharper." Her voice lowered. Your tea tastes like a tranquilizer. And I would know. That night, we didn't drink it. At dinner a few days later, I asked Richard, what was in that immunity tonic you used to give me every morning? He paused, just a beat too long, then smiled warm as ever. Just herbs. You always needed support. I held his gaze across the table, didn't blink. He looked away first. Rosie came by the next weekend. She brought soup, homemade. I hadn't tasted anything that real in years. She tilted her head after a while and said, "You seem clearer." I nodded. "I am." She asked me what changed. I handed her the journal. She read silently, page by page, face unreadable. When she finished, she closed the cover and held it in her lap. "I believe you," she said. "I've always believed you." She didn't cry. Neither did I. We were beyond that. She started helping immediately. Photographs of pill bottles, screenshots of dosage labels, backup folders hidden behind folders on her laptop. One night, late, we sat by the fire. I handed her an old bottle with no label, the one Richard had most recently started using. She stared at it for a long time, then threw it into the flames. It cracked, hissed, then split in two. "He doesn't know it yet," she said, "but this is war." I felt something then I hadn't felt in decades. Momentum. I noticed my handwriting had changed. It was steadier, clearer, like my voice had finally returned to my own throat. I could remember Bee's voice now, crystal clear. "Don't let yourself disappear for someone else's dream." I hadn't listened then, but now it echoed in every word I wrote. Richard was still careful, still controlled, but something in him had shifted. He checked my cups more often, noticed when I skipped a dose, started calling me emotional again. But now it didn't stick. His words slid off me like water off glass. Sometimes at breakfast we sat in silence, his eyes on me, measuring, calculating. I stared back, no longer flinching. He used to own the silence. Now I did. And in that silence, I wrote a final line in my journal. He doesn't know it yet, but I'm not his anymore. The powder sat on the kitchen counter in a plain Ziploc bag. It looked harmless. Beige, fine, nearly soft to the touch. Maggie stared at it for an hour before Rosie took it and slipped it into her coat pocket. Clara Morrison lived 3 houses down, retired pharmacist, kept to herself, baked on weekends, known for being quiet, discreet, and loyal only to the truth. It took a week. Then the call came. Maggie answered on the 3rd ring. Her fingers were steady. "Maggie," Clara said, voice thin but certain. "It's a sedative. Diazotrax, low dose, long term. This isn't herbal. It's clinical. It's unprescribed. And it's dangerous. The house spun. Not like it used to. Not like vertigo or chemical confusion. This time it was clarity. Searing, unstoppable clarity. The truth wasn't a whisper anymore. It was physical, measurable, a line of data printed in black ink and science. Maggie sat down, exhaled, then wrote in her journal, October 14th, 2019, 8:46 a.m. confirmed. I was not imagining this. I was never imagining this. She met Helena Cross again. Not at book club this time, but in the back of a cafe that smelled like cloves and wood smoke. Helena, retired detective turned true crime writer, once smiled indulgently when Maggie talked of feeling fogged. Now she listened without blinking. Maggie laid out the journals, the faded photos, the tea labels with dates, a scan of Clara's report. Helena flipped through a few pages, then stopped. "You wrote," she said slowly, "that your headaches got worse after Bea visited." Yes. Helena ran a fingertip across the page, lips tightening. Your dosage increased after every major confrontation, after Bea, after Eleanor, even after Daniel came home the last time. It wasn't paranoia, it was math. They began cross-referencing everything. Maggie's symptoms, Richard's travel schedule, prescription records, the gaps, the overlaps, the sudden relapses, the night she slept through dinner, the morning she forgot her own sister's name. Helena said quietly, I was wrong. This wasn't a feeling. This was a crime. Thomas Hargrave took longer. He was always Richard's friend first, dinner guest, golf partner, legal advisor for nearly 20 years. Maggie called him on a rainy morning. He didn't answer. She tried again 2 days later. He picked up. I need your help, she said. A week later, he showed up with a briefcase and tired eyes. I don't know what I'm looking for, he admitted. Start with everything, Rosie said from the hallway. He never hid it from you. He didn't think he had to. Thomas accessed private procurement records, names, transactions, quiet deliveries under shell accounts. Maggie sat across from him when he found the first alias. Her name, her birthday, a false clinic ID Diazotrex, ordered monthly, in doses that aligned almost perfectly with her journal. He found a second name, then a third, and then a file dated 4 days before Bea's car accident. A sedative order under her name, unfilled, canceled the day after her death. Thomas closed the folder, pressed a hand to his mouth. He didn't love you, Maggie. He documented you. The attic became Rosie's domain. She covered the walls in pages, copies of journal entries, medical charts, screenshots of Richard's logs. There were diagrams of the tea cabinet, a timeline drawn in red pen, a photo of Bea, a copy of the autopsy report, a blurry scan of one of Richard's prescription slips, written in his neat cursive. Code words. Dosages. Rosie pinned a single sentence above the desk. We don't need to hurt him. We just need to make him seen. The room felt like a chapel. Maggie went up most nights, just to sit, to remember, to hold her own memory like a fragile egg. One morning she poured the coffee as usual. Let it sit. Let the steam rise. Then placed the cup on the table across from her. Richard entered the room a few minutes later, his steps practiced. He paused when he saw the untouched drink. Not thirsty? He asked. She looked at him, calm. No, she said. I think I'm waking up. He smiled, tightly, sat down, didn't drink either. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just a shifting of the air, a new alignment of gravity. She saw it in his eyes, not anger, not even fear, calculation. His hand tightened slightly around his napkin. He knew. She knew he knew. That night, Maggie and Rosie burned a copy of their wedding photo in the fireplace. Not the original, just the illusion of it. They didn't speak. They just watched the edges curl, blacken, then disappear. Maggie called Helena and Thomas the next day, sat them down in the study. She opened her journal, flipped to the final page. The pen didn't shake anymore. She wrote slowly. January 7th, 2020, 11:03 a.m. I'm ready. Rosie hugged her in the doorway. Not hard, just steady. Maggie leaned in. We don't survive in silence anymore, Rosie said. Maggie nodded, looked back once at the old house. The walls hadn't changed, but she had. Richard was still in the living room, reading, or pretending to. A cup of tea beside him. She didn't ask what was in it. She no longer needed to ask. He used to be the observer, the scientist, the one who documented and measured and noted her every breath. But now she had the data. Now she had the map. And he was just another variable in the story she was finally writing herself. The kettle had already whistled. Steam drifted faintly above the 2 porcelain cups on the kitchen table, each perfectly aligned. The old clock ticked like it always had, too loud for such a quiet house. The walls held their breath. Maggie sat, cardigan draped over her shoulders, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The coffee in her cup was dark, untouched. His cup sat empty. Richard entered the room at 2:07 p.m., right on schedule. He carried the tray as if nothing had changed. A sugar bowl, 2 spoons, a small biscuit in its wrapper. Ritual, like always. He placed it down between them, then reached for the coffee pot. "I already poured mine," she said softly. He paused, then nodded. He reached for his own cup. She watched him. "I never drank it today," she said, eyes steady. "I just needed to see if you'd still bring it." The silence that followed was colder than any scream. He looked at her. No smile this time. His hand hovered over the pot. The weight of the moment pulled his shoulders down. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone understands what I felt back then. If you do, write a little note below. It comforts me she didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply waited." He said nothing. He set the pot down, sat across from her, looked at the cup, then at her, then back at the cup. And then he stood, slowly, as if gravity itself had betrayed him. He walked out of the room without a word. The front door didn't slam. The floorboards didn't creak. Only the sound of his retreat. Quiet, measured, final. She didn't cry. Her hand trembled slightly. She placed it over her chest, breathing deep, and for the first time in over 30 years, the breath didn't catch in her throat. She whispered to the empty kitchen, "That's enough." Richard never asked her why, never confronted her, never mentioned that moment again. A year passed, and then the call came. Cardiac arrest, home office, slumped over paperwork and unopened mail. No foul play, no autopsy, no service. Maggie hung up the phone and sat down with a cup of tea. She didn't feel relief. She didn't feel vengeance. She just felt air. Clean, unshaped air, moving through the house again. The files in his study were donated to a university. His research was absorbed into a program on coercive pharmacology. The family received a plaque. Maggie never picked it up. She mailed his remaining medication to a research lab in Vermont with a handwritten note. "Study this. Someone will need to know." The house shifted, slowly, softly. It became hers again. Rosie moved in for a while. She painted the living room a deep sea green, replaced the locks, took down the wedding photos, replanted the garden. Maggie began writing again, not in secret, not in code, just pages and pages typed out on a laptop Rosie had gifted her 2 birthdays ago. The memoir took shape in silence. Helena Cross helped with the timeline. Thomas handled the publishing. They released it anonymously at first. A small print run. Word of mouth. Then came the reviews, the forums, the whispers in women's circles, therapy groups, survivor retreats. The book traveled without needing her. The Woman Who Slept Lightly. Her Life Survived, by Margaret Ellison. It climbed quietly into bestseller lists. Maggie declined interviews. She declined panels. But every letter sent to the P.O. box was read, answered, signed in her own handwriting. The foreword, written by Helena, ended with, "I've solved murders with less evidence, but this was the anatomy of power, and she dismantled it, word by word." Rosie handled the inquiries, protected her mother like a storm wall. She spoke at readings, fundraisers, her voice fierce, unwavering. She turned poison into a story, Rosie once said. She made it art. Aunt Vivian never got to see the book release. But in the acknowledgments, Maggie wrote, "To Vivian, who saw it all when no one else would, I hope you're sipping something strong wherever you are." The final chapter of the memoir ended not with rage or revelation, but a quiet offering. If you're reading this and feel something familiar, you're not imagining it. Someone did this to me, but I'm still here. You can be too. Now, in the slow hours of her 81st year, Maggie sat on the porch swing, the same one from so long ago. It creaked gently in the breeze. A soft cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. A steaming cup of tea rested in her hands. The garden in front of her had overgrown, wild with color and life. Bees drifted lazily between stems. A notebook sat in her lap. Her pen moved slowly. She sipped her tea. And then she smiled. Small, private, real. She never drank coffee anymore. This is what waking up feels like.